Welcome to the Freedom from the Struggle podcast. Here are your hosts, Anthony and Melissa.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the Freedom from the Struggle podcast. I'm your host, Anthony Corelli. Unfortunately, we will not be joined by my co-host, Melissa, tonight. We have a lot of family plans coming up and a lot of travel, so we wanted to make sure we got out an episode, but it's going to have to be with me being solo tonight. With that being said, I think we have an amazing episode lined up. We have another letter from a listener who I think is a skeptic, or at least somebody who's not necessarily a fan of our podcast, but definitely was kind and patient enough to write an honest, sincere letter asking some questions. So we're going to cover his letter tonight and discuss, the topic within the letter that I think will help benefit us all as we look towards the concepts that we cover here on this podcast about teaching people about paranormal activity and how that relates to the grace of Jesus Christ and the concepts outlined in the Bible, actually. So we're going to get to that in just a second. I just want to remind everyone that we do have a second podcast. I know I've been pushing this a lot, but we have gotten a lot of questions about it. And our second podcast is called the Struggle Series Podcast, but it's not a podcast in this format. It is me narrating the 3 books in my trilogy of books entitled the Struggle Series. And so I'm just reading those books, and it's a way to get that content out there without you having to actually purchase the book. So it's free wherever you listen to your podcasts. And each week we just simply release another chapter. So right now, if you were to go to the Struggle Series podcast, you can listen to all of book 1 entitled The Struggle. And by the time you're listening to this, you should be about chapter 14 of the second book entitled The Sacrifice. And there's only 16 chapters there. So you're almost to the end of that book as well. So it's kind of one of those things, if you started listening to the first book and the second book, by the time you got to book 2, you'll probably be able to finish that in its entirety. And then immediately after, we've decided we're going to release book 3 in audio format before it is actually released with the publisher. And because of my publisher, I retain all the rights to my property. So I'm able to do that without their permission. So we'd like to do that. And the reason for that is because we here at this podcast want to get this content out, because those books, although they are fictional, they do outline kind of the tale of a crazy out of the box minister named Anthony. I wonder where we get that from. And we are out there just trying to, help people who are struggling with demonic possession and paranormal activity. And there are some real life stories interwoven into the fictional story of the Struggle series, but there's also some concepts in there about how demons work and how they attack us and why they attack us. And so it basically goes right along with what we do here on this podcast. So if you're interested in that, please check it out. And just like this podcast, make sure you subscribe, hit the like button, hit the bells for notifications on Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon, wherever you listen to your podcast. We are also in the process of releasing video for those book series, and those will be found on YouTube and Rumble as well under the Struggle series. However, we are only up to about chapter 9, I think, of the Struggle. So the video takes a little longer, and it's not super, high production. We're just using some images, some AI images, as we're reading through those chapters to give you a little more visual if that's the format that you like to listen. We are noticing that a lot more people are loving to listen to this podcast on YouTube and Rumble. So if that's the format that you like, we do release these with audio only and just some cover art there, and that's it. But that is a way that a lot of people like to listen. So you can listen to this podcast there as well. And just a little favor we'd like to ask from you. If you are somebody who listens in that format, but you also listen here, or you only listen to one format, if you're bored, go to all the formats that you listen to your podcast and just select us, hit the like and subscribe, because it helps us grow the channel. And we just want to be a place where people can come and get the help that they need. Or, as in today's case, get some of their questions answered. So without Melissa, I'm going to really dive into this, and we're really going to try to keep the time down. We've been going about an hour and a half or so, and I think that's just going to be what it is. But this one we might be able to get through a little quicker. And so this is a letter that I actually wrestled with um, in regards to what the content I put on here, because I don't know if I've said this before, and maybe I have, but I'm somebody who isn't uncomfortable or doesn't mind pissing off the extremes on both sides of the fence. And being a Christian paranormal podcast, what I mean by the extremes is the extreme like Christian type, almost religious zealot like people. They hate this podcast because I talk about paranormal activity. I read the bad words in the letters that people write in. I don't try to be religious here because I'm not religious. I'm a Christ follower, but I hate religion. And so religious people do not like this. On the other side of the fence, there are people that are extreme paranormal people that aren't Christian or aren't believers in Christ, and therefore they can be turned off by this podcast because it doesn't meet their belief system as well. However, I'm not trying to reach either side of that. I'm trying to reach the middle. People who are spiritually curious and are searching for reasons for paranormal activity, or have had paranormal activity, demonic attacks, spiritual warfare, and need help. These people aren't trying to be religious, and they're not trying to be unreligious. They're just trying to get answers and help. And that's what we do here. So a letter like this is one that, I wrestle with because it's obviously written from somebody who's a little more on the religious Christian side, or at least that's my opinion. However, this brother in Christ named Richard wrote us this letter very politely and very, almost inquisitively. At least that's how I read it. And so I wanted to use it as an opportunity to show that we will entertain these things if you are truly open to the answers and you're really sincerely wanting the answers in the first place. And so let me just jump to the letter, and then we're going to kind of take it from there. So this letter says, Anthony, my name is Richard, and I recently listened to your podcast, and I'm still struggling trying to understand what you are about. Okay, that's what I'm about. So I think that'll make sense to you in here in a second. So you say you are a Christian, but you seem a little too obsessed with the paranormal and demons. And Richard and anybody else listening, I get that a lot from religious people, that I'm obsessed with this topic. But I think hopefully by the end of this, you'll at least have an answer to, or maybe my rebuttal to that. But I'm seeing more and more of this lately, and frankly, it is disturbing. You seem to be one of many who are focused on this topic, and I don't know why. Why are so many Christians focused on demons and Nephilim when the gospel of Jesus still needs to be preached? Shouldn't we be focused on leading people to Jesus, not teaching them about these obscure concepts in the Bible? It's not that I don't believe in the Nephilim. It's just that I think focusing on Jesus is more important. Thank you for considering this letter, your brother in Christ, Richard, and I'll leave the name out, last name. So, Richard, if you're listening, and to any of those who share that sentiment, let me kind of maybe walk you through what we believe here. I would assume you haven't listened to all of the episodes, or you have, and maybe you're still struggling. But I believe that we as Christians owe it to people that we speak to, especially people that we are quote unquote witnessing to. I like to just say I do life with people and share my story, and talk to them about Jesus. I'm not, just simply set out, trying to, witness kind of comes across as forcing Jesus down people's throat. I just try to do life with people and share the gospel that way. But many times people have questions that we need to have answers to. And if we as Christians don't have answers to concepts, whether they like the answer or not is irrelevant. When you have no answer, you almost reinforce the stereotype that we're ignorant to everything and we're so focused on just our Bible. But there are answers to all of these questions in the Bible. Again, it may not be the answer they want to hear, but it is an answer. And so this topic is becoming more and more prevalent, Richard, I believe, because we're in the end times and things that Christians used to be able to ignore can no longer be ignored. There is a massive spiritual battle going on in the world right now. You can look at it through our country here in the United States, because some listeners are listening from other places. And you can see this battle going on, these ideations that are at war, and people who could otherwise get along very easily only have to, name their political affiliation, and instant hatred will come from the other side. Whatever side you're on, stating that side will get you hatred. I wear a lot of graphic tees that say controversial things to some people. I just wear Christian graphic tees. And I will get accosted in stores. I have a shirt that I wear that says, normal isn't coming back, Jesus is. And I will say no less than 5, maybe 6 people have grabbed me in the store. And when I say grabbed, one person literally grabbed my wrist, a woman did, and said, why do you still believe in that old nonsense? Why do you have to wear that? You know it offends people, blah, 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 blah. Now imagine, I want you to imagine this. We are in a place in time where somebody cannot have an opinion because it stirs up something in the other person. I'm old. I'm in my 50s. So I was born in the 70s, the very early 70s. And I would say that Christianity was more normal or maybe more accepted. I'm sure there were people that were not believers back then. But the scary thing is there wasn't this big controversy. If you were not a Christian, you simply understood that that's what they believe and you believe. But now it's become a battle. And Richard and anybody listening, if you can understand that that has to be spiritual, that has to be something beyond humans. That has to be some spiritual battle that's being fought through the lives of human beings. Like I said, I have family members who, if we talk about sports, even though we have rival teams, we get along. But there can be no mention of politics because it will ruin a family holiday. And it's tragic because these are people that are related to you. You've known them for years and years and years. But the second this topic comes up, it's controversial. And that's what I'm trying to focus on as I answer your question is this is more prevalent than ever. I'm not saying there's more demons than there ever was, but I'm saying they're more powerful now because as the end times approach, they've been given more and more permission to go out and do what they do because it's culminating in this battle that Richard you're fully aware of that's coming um as outlined in the book of Revelation. We won't bore you with that because I'm sure as a Christian you're fully aware of that. But what I'm saying is in order to really get people to understand this whole complexity of Christianity, I think it does everybody a disservice if we do not talk about the seed war. And if you're not familiar with the seed war, and this is not just for Richard, this is for anybody, we've talked about this a lot. And please go back and listen to, a lot of season 1 and then definitely parts of season 3. And throughout the, even season 2, we've touched on this subject. But I'm gonna give a reader's digest of this and then just encourage you, not if you don't want to listen to the other episodes of this podcast, just do your own homework. Um, I have to believe that when we when we get to these places where we don't understand these concepts, we not only cannot answer a lot of questions, but we cannot really fully understand why Jesus had to come and die on that cross. And if we can fully understand that, then we not only live more fulfilled lives, but we also live a life that we're able to share the true gospel and why it's so important for people to understand why this paranormal activity is increasing and why they feel spiritually bankrupt. So let's start with Genesis 3:15, and I'm going to read this out of the ESV. It says, "I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel." Now, Richard, and anybody listening, if you're like me, you grew up, hearing these things in church. I was raised Catholic, but I became a Protestant evangelical Christian at age 16 and has studied the Bible, quite a bit, and definitely heard zillions of sermons where we always focused on the second part of that, where we were, screaming triumphantly that Jesus is going to crush the serpent's head while his heel is bruised, and that would be the cross. And we always heard that part of the message. But did we really truly hear the first part where it says, "I will put enmity," or "you will be at war between you and the woman, and between your offspring," meaning the serpent's offspring, "and her offspring"? And so right there, you have a dilemma. What does this mean? And I'm sure, Richard, you can go to several commentaries where people would explain this as in 100 different ways, differently than what I'm explaining it as. But in my opinion, this seed war is the result of this fallen serpent trying to crush God by ruining his creation plan. And so God created this paradise, which we're reading here at the as we go into 3:15. This man and this woman have just sinned. Their paradise, they were in this perfect place, and Satan had come in and ruined that. And so he was trying to take away this promise, this beautiful creation that God gave man and woman dominion over. And so God sets the second part of the plan in motion, which is there's going to be a seed war, because now that Satan has taken away this perfect creation, mankind is going to drift farther and farther. And these angels, which are not perfect, because Satan, being this guardian cherub angel, was not perfect, these other angels would come and sin with man by having sex with these women and creating these Nephilim being. And this seed of the serpent is there, but then there's still the seed of the woman, which, if we go to Genesis later on in Genesis chapter 6, we can see these Nephilim are on the earth, but this man Noah is not corrupted. His seed is not corrupted. And so God chooses to wipe out all of the corrupted seed in order to give mankind a new start. So you can see this love that God has for his creation, but his creation is now, entrenched in sin. And so when we go and we understand that this war just continues to be fought, then you can understand the full significance of life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, because we had to be born again. We had to have a way out of this, deteriorating humanity. And we, in and of ourselves, will continue to be too flawed to get into the presence of this perfect God. No one can get to heaven and be in the presence of God with any stain at all. God is too perfect. And so it has to be this death of Jesus Christ, which is, Richard, what you want me to speak of. But the reason this is so important and the reason that mankind drifted far away is there's other forces that are now in play that are leading us astray. So I'm going to take you to one of the scariest passages, I believe, in all of Scripture. And it's Luke 22:31. And Jesus talking to Peter, who at the time his name's Simon, his name is about ready to be changed. And Jesus said to him, Simon, Simon, behold, Satan demanded to have you that he might sift you like wheat. So Luke 22:31 says, listen, Simon, Satan demanded to have you. He is after you. He is coming to God and saying, I want that one. I want to sift him like wheat. And if you understand that, Satan is asking to rip Peter apart. But Jesus goes on to say in the next verse that he prayed for Peter that his faith would not fail. And then he says this, he says, and when he turns back or repents, however, what translation you read, then he is to strengthen his brothers. So Peter is basically being told that, I'm going to pray for you that your faith doesn't fail because you're going to turn. But when you turn back, then you are to strengthen your brothers. He's commissioning him in this battle, in this war. And this is the battle that we all face because I don't think, at least in my opinion, we understand that we are all being tested. We are all being influenced by these demons. And yes, in my opinion, of course, it's enough to know Jesus and turn to him in our need. Yes, that is the basic gospel. That is all somebody needs to achieve salvation and a better life. But with that being said, we cannot truly understand how to live a fulfilled life unless we understand how and why the enemy comes for us. And this is Peter, the apostle. This is Peter, who arguably is the closest person to Jesus, if not John. And this passage shows here that there's a war going on, and Satan and his army are after believers, after followers. Well, why is that? Well, we're the ones that can help people become Christ followers and become new creations, like it says in 2 Corinthians 5:17. So these enemies, these fallen angels, have these creatures called the Nephilim, and these Nephilim are killed and they are cursed to roam the earth. These are the demons. This is the army of Satan that is after mankind. And when I hear Christians, and Richard, I'm just going to be honest with you, when I hear Christians not want to talk about this concept and want to tell me just to preach the gospel, well, I'm going to read from the Gospels right now. I'm going to go to Mark chapter 5, and I'm going to read about Jesus performing deliverance ministry. And so this is the very Jesus that you want me to preach about. And for those of you who are not Christians, I would encourage you to listen to this story with your eyes closed and create some word pictures, because it's always, I don't want to say humorous, but it always is kind of curious to me how people want to shun the Bible. But I wonder if you've read, because this story I'm about to read is a paranormal story, just like you would hear on a TikTok video or on a YouTube video or something like that, where somebody would tell a story of an exorcist going in to perform an exorcism. Visualize this in your head. This is Mark chapter 5. It says, they came to the other side of the sea, to the country of the Gerasenes. And when Jesus had stepped out of the boat, immediately met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit. So, for those of you that know the story, Jesus is on this boat. There's a storm. The disciples are scared to death. Jesus is just chilling, and they're crying out to Jesus like, "Don't you even care we're going to die?" And Jesus gets up and rebukes the storm. It goes to peacefulness. He says to the ocean, "Be still." And then he tells them, "Why are you afraid? You have no faith?" And they were even more afraid and said to one another, "Who is this that even the wind and the sea can obey him?" So they're like freaked out. And this says, and when Jesus had stepped out of the boat, immediately. See, a lot of times when we read scriptures, we're not sure how long in between one story or the other, because remember, verses and chapters were added later. These were simply writings once upon a time. So a lot of times we don't know. But this says immediately when he gets out of the boat, there comes a man out of the tombs with an unclean spirit. And he had lived among the tombs, the Bible says, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with chains, for he had been bound with shackles and chains, but he wrenched the chains apart and he broke the shackles into pieces. Now, metal was metal back then, just like it was now. Of course, the strength may vary, but no human being should be able to break chains and break shackles apart. But this man could. Classic paranormal activity. For those of you who are into the paranormal and exorcisms, one of the signs that you would know somebody is possessed is by this superhuman strength that they possess. Well, how about a man that could break chains and shackles into pieces? That was this man. No one had the strength to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and on the mountains, he was always crying out and cutting himself with stones. Now, if you've ever seen The Exorcist or any of these movies, they will show these demons possessing people and causing them to harm themselves or wound themselves. Well, here it is, right here in the Bible, 2,000 years ago. This is being written. So, the Bible says, and when he saw Jesus from afar, he ran and fell down before him, and crying out with a loud voice, he says, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, do not torment me." For he was saying to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." Now, this is rich in information here. This unclean spirit knew who Jesus was instantly, and he was begging him already, basically alluding to the fact that this wasn't the time of the judgment yet. So this tells me that the demons knew their fate. Listen to what I just said. The demons know their fate. And instead of them cowering and going to sulk, their hatred and their disdain for humans causes them to want to go out to hurt us, cause us to hurt ourselves, and cause us to hurt others, to take us down with them. And so this man of the Gerasene, of the country of the Gerasenes, was full of demons. I don't know how he got there. Some extra, biblical writings might have, you know, information about this, but there's nothing biblically that would say for sure. I haven't studied it a lot, to be honest. So I don't know how he got there, but he got there. He is possessed by tons of demons. And each one of these demons was aware of their fate. So these beings, their hatred overrides I would say, to a human, your natural response would be to go somewhere and cry in fear of your fate. But instead, these beings just want to destroy us before they go. And so that's what they knew here. And so Jesus asked them, "What is your name?" The man replied, the demons in him replied, "My name is Legion, for we are many." and he begged him earnestly not to send them out of the country. So, again, those of you who are paranormal enthusiasts, you've seen this concept in many movies where a priest or an exorcist is trying to get a demon out and the demon says, I am Legion. Well, that comes from this. And the fact that priests and exorcists ask the demons, what is your name, to gain power over them comes from this very passage. So if you're interested in those movies, I encourage you to really study this passage because that is where this concept comes from. Jesus is commanding the demon name itself to show who's in control. And this man, or the demons in this man, says, we are legion, for we are many. And they did not want to leave. So a great herd of pigs was feeding them, or feeding there on the hillside, and they begged him, saying, send us to the pigs, let us enter them. So Jesus, it says, gave them permission, and the unclean spirits came out and entered the pigs, and the herd, numbering about 2,000, rushed down a steep bank into the sea and drowned in the sea. Now, these demons know who has the authority. They know it's Jesus. We don't have authority. I've prayed deliverance over many, many people, but it's not my authority that delivers people. It's the authority of Jesus. And these demons encountered that very Jesus, and they didn't want to leave the region because that was their region to oversee. This principality had a legion of demons harassing this man, causing this havoc because they want a body to inhabit. They want a region to inhabit. And so their little deal with Jesus, which it wasn't really a deal, was that, well, if you're going to make us leave this guy, at least let us go into the pigs. Now, there's a lot of theology here, Richard, but many people believe that Jesus allowed them to go into the pigs and they thought they won, but Jesus knew that the pigs would react to them entering these animals and then drive themselves off the cliff into the sea, basically sending them to the abyss where they should have gone anyway. Now, other people might have different theology about that, but the point I'm making is this, that these demons are aware of their fate, and yet they're still able to, take their hatred and try to bring us down, as I said. But the other part of this is, and this is for Richard and the paranormal enthusiasts, is demons obviously have the ability to possess animals. And although there can be a lot of theories, whether they be current Nephilim that are roaming the earth, or whether demons can possess some animal, and that is where you get the answers to questions like, what is the dog man? Or what are these, creatures that we see all over the earth? Um, if you understand what I'm saying. So, like, if a demon can possess an animal, then does that cause maybe what people call the concept of a skinwalker? And so you can see, Richard, how having this knowledge, having these answers, um, allows you to witness to people, or to preach the gospel to people and have answers to their questions. So here's an example that we covered a couple of episodes ago. What about aliens? Well, my answer is that aliens are demons. They're some sort of what the Bible calls Elohim creature. And Richard, a lot of times when you're a little older, I'm not sure how old you are, but we were taught that Elohim meant God. But Elohim is actually could be plural, which means gods. And that term is used in the Bible not only for God, like the Elohim of Elohim, so the God of gods, but also for spiritual creatures. And it's even used for disembodied spirits of people. So these Elohim are these spiritual beings. And so these demons appear to be these spiritual beings, demons, angels, what at least have an answer to this question according to studies you've done. Because if somebody's wrestling with whether they want to know Jesus in today's day and age, with UFOs and UAPs being, acknowledged by the government, people may not be willing to turn to Jesus unless this quote unquote religion has an answer to that. And so people are out there searching the paranormal world. They're ghost hunting. They're watching paranormal programming on television. Horror movies that used to terrify us, like The Exorcist or the Amityville Horror, um, people today now laugh at because they're so mundane and so, milk toast compared to the movies that you can watch now. So people are out there searching for answers to these spiritual questions, to the spirit realm, to paranormal activity. And so we have to have an answer. And that's why this is important. So when you think about Jesus exorcising demons, where did we as Christians get the idea that we don't have to talk about that anymore? If there was demons in Jesus's time, there's demons now. And I'm going to take you to a passage in Job because I think this passage may also help answer some questions for people. Now, for those of you who do not know the story of Job, Job is this man, and some people believe that Job was actually the oldest written book in what we call the Bible. It's not the oldest book it's not the oldest story chronologically, but it may be the oldest book. And this man Job has a pretty good life. He's really, really into God. He even prays for his kids who he knows are out doing shenanigans, but he's making sacrifices. He's walking blameless and upright to God. Now, that doesn't mean he was perfect, but that means he understood the sacrificial process and he was following it. Now it says in Job 1, chapter 6, now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. So again, let me read that with that word Elohim. Now there was a day when the Elohim of God came to present themselves before the Lord, meaning the Elohim, and Satan came among them. So Satan has the ability to sit at heaven's council. And the Lord said to Satan, "From where have you come from? Where have you been hanging out?" And of course, Satan answered the Lord, said, "From going to and fro on the earth and from walking up and down on it." So Satan is patrolling the earth. Why? Because he's the accuser. And he's out there watching what we're doing, trying to influence us, trying to show God that we don't deserve the forgiveness that he didn't get. And so God says, "Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil?" So I want you to think about this for a second. Satan's job is to accuse us, and he's going around trying to influence us away from God so then he can go report back to God. Because in the reality of life is if we do not have Jesus, then we are not blameless and we do not deserve salvation. We do not deserve an eternity in heaven. And so this is why Jesus is important, because Jesus comes and becomes that ultimate sacrifice, which is the gospel that Richard and others who believe like Richard want me to teach. But it does give a little more weight to the fact of why that's important and why we cannot do this on our own. It's not just that we have a sin nature, which we do, we are under massive spiritual attack all the time. And when you read Job, every time you sin, Satan has that in the record and he wants to report that to God. And Richard, you're saved, so you understand this. But if you're explaining this to others, do they really understand until they've gotten to the place where you are? And what if their questions become, well, why is it so hard? You Christians are all saved, but you're just as big of a sinner as me. And what about these pastors that do this? And what about the priests that did that? And what about all of this sin in the church? And unless you have an answer for why we, even as saved Christians, continue to struggle, you can't really make the Christian argument. There's that phrase, well, Christians aren't perfect, they're just forgiven, which is true, but it's become almost like a cop out. But when you can tell somebody, I'm a Christian and I was saved from my sin when Jesus died on the cross, and I've accepted Jesus and I've accepted that. But I'm still in this human body and I'm still under spiritual attack. And I may actually be more prone to that attack now that I've become effective for the kingdom. And here's why: because these spiritual beings that were cursed to this eternity, that these demons were, that asked to go into the pigs, they know their fate, but they're after me because they want to take me with them. And so, yes, I fail. The only difference between me and you is that I have a God who died for these sins, not just for the ones I committed yesterday before I got saved, but for the ones that I'll continue to commit because I'm still stuck in this spiritual battle. And when I understand this love that Jesus had, that he would die for me while I was still a sinner, then I become better and better and better. So, Richard, if you're witnessing to somebody, you can say, yes, there's paranormal activity everywhere. And that fear that you have of these beings is rooted in something real. But I can show you a story about this Jesus who they're afraid of. That's who you want on your side. Now, I want to kind of get through this next passage, and you can go back and listen to this season, and you'll find a bigger wealth of knowledge on this topic. But we're going to talk about this man named Nimrod. And if you read in Genesis, where it talks about the Tower of Babel, it says, "And Cush begat Nimrod, and he began to be a mighty man on the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord." Now, one translation that, or other translations anyway, you can read, says it became a mighty warrior, but it is definitely better translated in the King James, like where it is in the King James version, where it says he began to be a mighty man, a mighty one. What does that mean? And why is it important for us to hear that he was a mighty hunter before the Lord? So most of us would say, well, the Bible wants to show us that he became a good hunter so he can feed all of these people to grow a nation. But I don't think that's what it means, Richard, because it says he began to be a mighty man, which means he wasn't a mighty man. Now, does that mean he got strong? Does that mean he became a political figure? That's what we've been told. But I believe that this is where his seed was corrupted. And I believe the Tower of Babel was not just a big, tall tower that we think it was. I believe it was a place for some sort of what one of my favorite pastors, Troy Brewer, says is some creepy demon sex magic, or some sort of DNA altering, type of a process where Nimrod became a Nephilim, became a giant. And we can read in other texts where people, uh, you know, including, some stories that you've never quite put together, that Esau may have actually been out killing Nimrod. And that's why when he came back famished, because he was on the run, that he sold his birthright to Jacob for a bowl of soup. But, that's for you to do your own study and decide. But when this mighty man, so we know that these Nephilim existed because we hear of Goliath. We also hear of, this king who had a bed that was so big that, we always thought that that's what, because this man was so big. Well, this bed was so important to be mentioned. Why? Because there was probably some sort of a DNA altering process going on there as well. And so you could read about these in the Bible, and you could also go back and listen to previous episodes, because I'm definitely taking too much time here. But I want you to understand that this seed war exists, and that's what we're fighting today. There are demonic influences that are after the seed of the woman, which are the Christians, which is Jesus and his followers. Remember, when we take on the name of Jesus, we put targets on our head. The Bible even says so. So this seed war is realistic, and it is the answer to these supernatural things. And Richard, I'm going to say this, like, I don't know how much demonic activity has increased. I don't have a study, or, I don't know if it's even, something that we could tangibly grasp. But I do know this: there's cameras everywhere today. So maybe there was just as much demonic activity before, or paranormal activity, and we just didn't see it. I believe it's increased, but let's just take it from here. With cameras everywhere, we definitely have to answer to some of these things that are not CGI and are not hoaxes. Now, I'll be honest with you, probably the vast majority of things you would see online or on these programs is a hoax or could be explained away. But there are things out there that are easily accessible, that photographers and cinematographers and CGI experts have looked at these things and said, this is not altered. This is real. And how do we answer that? How do we answer about aliens and dinosaurs and all of these supernatural, paranormal events and concepts in the Bible? They're there. But if we don't understand the Bible or we don't go there, then we look ignorant to the rest of the world. This podcast exists because we are trying to reach the group of people that are trying to find God or answers through the paranormal research and through the paranormal, you know, I don't want to say obsession, but the pursuit of paranormal answers. If you understand what I'm saying, these people are hungry for a spiritual answer. And if we simply give them the answer of, well, the answer is Jesus, just accept him and this stuff doesn't matter, they're not going to turn to Jesus because that's not an answer. And more importantly, they're still going to have the questions. So when somebody says to me, how old is the Bible? I don't care. That's my answer. Well, you have to care. No, I don't. Could it be 6,000 years old? Sure. God's done crazier miracles than that. Could it be billions of years? Sure. I don't know what a day meant in the Bible. I don't know if when God says he created this on day one, is that a real day? The Bible says a day is like 1,000 years. I don't know. But here's what I do know: I can give you an answer to why there's temple complexes all over the earth that we would struggle to build today. And definitely which contractors and what kind of money would it take to do that. I can give you an answer to that. I can give you an answer that these angels that came down from heaven wanted to be gods and wanted to give up their seat in the heavenly realm to come here and rule on earth and take women and have these demigod like sons. And they needed places to be worshiped. The pyramids may actually be some sort of a power source for extra, what the ancient astronaut theorists would say, extraterrestrial, like power plants. But maybe they were just power plants for a technology that these beings needed to demonstrate their rule, or to make the earth what they wanted it to be. Because remember, these angels had the knowledge that was passed on. We can no longer afford to believe that we were, eating with our hands, and then all of a sudden in the blip of human history, we're able to carve stones and make temple complexes when we had chisels. We can't afford to believe that as Christians or non-Christians. There's pieces of this missing. Well, I have the answers of these paranormal stories. Here's another one, just as I'm rambling. We have archaeological evidence that this city of Jericho existed, and that the walls actually blew out and became a siege ramp that an army could go up into the city. Well, the Bible tells this paranormal story of these people carrying this ark around the city and making these noises, crying out these noises at such a loud volume. you know, People today, and even if you watch some of these, programs about ancient aliens and such, they will talk about maybe they had a weapon that was frequency oriented. Well, maybe they did, but that doesn't contradict the Bible. See, when somebody's saying in the history they must have had these weapons these tools that can move stone through sound or vibration or frequency, you could say, yeah, there's a story about that in the Bible about Jericho. See how much that could affect somebody listening to you versus saying, "Oh, that stuff that's all hearsay or that doesn't exist." Well, as history continues to progress forward, as our human history begins to progress forward, we seem to have the ability to go back with a little more, I guess, ability to see things that we couldn't before through technologies and instruments and things like that. Well, with that being said, it's a disservice if we don't answer the supernatural things with the answers that were presented to us. We have to let people know the fullness of the scriptures, not just the story of Jesus and get saved and then you're good. I want to know why archaeology hasn't disproved the Bible yet if I'm a non believer. But I bet that non believer thinks that archaeology has. But I'm really asking the question because I want to know if that's for sure. And when you can tell them archaeology keeps presenting stuff that shows that the Bible had some pretty accurate historical data. When people want to know about paranormal activity, you can tell them, well, it's okay to believe in ghosts, but are some of these ghosts not actually ghosts, but maybe demons? Because even the most atheistic of paranormal programming will sometimes say, well, this has to be some sort of malevolent spirit. Well, I can tell you who those spirits are, and I could show you that this stuff has been going on for centuries. The world is hungry for knowledge, in my opinion, and we're the ones, as I'm saying, with all of the answers to the paranormal questions. Again, even if people don't like the answer, we still have an answer. And that's what we want to focus on here on this podcast. And so, do I want people to know Jesus? Yes. Do I want them to accept Jesus and have a life where they're grateful because they have been saved from themselves and from this spiritual battle? Sure. But I also want them to understand the spiritual battle because once they're saved, the attacks may become more intense, more severe. And they may have family members who watch the transition in them, and they may say, well, tell me about Jesus. And you used to be, have all these answers, to these paranormal questions. Now, how did you get them answered? I want to be the person that gave them that answer. But more importantly, Richard, and I think this is what I will close with today, I have seen people possessed by demons. I am a therapist. I am somebody who is very, very trained and skilled in differential diagnosis. I have been called by other priests and deliverance ministers to ask if I thought this person may be mentally ill and not possessed. And in a lot of cases, mental illness seemed like a better picture to me and at least prompted them to do more study before they just started doing exorcisms, especially in the Catholic Church. The Christian church has kind of a little different philosophy, but I should say the Protestant church, we're all Christians. But what I'm going to say is that on many occasions, these people were demonically possessed, and deliverance ministry saved them from that. And introducing them to Jesus and having them understand that Jesus will fight this fight for you is how they gain that deliverance. It's not me sending demons away because I'm some powerful creature. No, it's me putting the demons at bay so these people can make their peace with God and understand that God has already won this battle. But there are many questions that we have to answer, and this place is where they get that. So, Richard, I will just politely say that if this is not a topic that you're interested in, or it's a topic that you don't feel is important, we're not going to stop doing what we're doing here because we're trying to help the people that have these questions. Am I going to lead them to Jesus? I'm going to try. I'm not just going to give them superficial paranormal answers. And I would encourage you to go back and listen. I have never shied away from the gospel here. I have never catered this program just to reach paranormal people and tried to slip in a little Jesus here and there. We talk about Jesus every week here. And we talk about how he is the way, the truth, and the life, and no one can be saved except if they go through him. We talk about this all the time. So it sounds to me like the topic is of the Nephilim and paranormal activity is just not in your wheelhouse, or maybe maybe it's starting to bother you, and hopefully this gives you an answer to what that is. Now, there are plenty of podcasts and plenty of ministers and plenty of churches that I will refer people to that never make it to the air, where I simply say, this is not the place where you get that kind of help, but I can try to help guide you to where you can. What you need is not deliverance ministry. You need a church family that can gather around you and help you through this difficult time. This is not possession. This is struggle. And I can pray for you on this podcast, but you need a group of people to surround you, to take you in. So those things don't make it on the air here very often because that's not what we're designed to do here. As a minister, I didn't do deliverance ministry 24/7. I preached every weekend. I led worship at different seasons of my life. I talked mostly about the gospel of Jesus Christ. But on a handful of occasions, I was called to do deliverance, and that's what I did. And at this season of my life, I've decided that because I see the world the way it is and the way it's deteriorating, that I want to be a place where people who are curious about the paranormal can get an answer rooted in the Bible, not an answer rooted in paranormal theory, which really never gives answers to how you get rid of these things. If ghosts truly exist, which, I know it's a controversial topic that I won't cover today, but if they truly exist, then yes, you might be able to go to one of these people to help them move on, quote unquote. But if they're demons, most of these paranormal people are not equipped. We better be as Christians. And Richard, my only last question to you would be, if somebody came to you and said, I think I'm possessed, do you possess the faith, the ability to help those people by praying deliverance over them? Have you studied this topic to understand the concepts they may talk about when they explain that they were involved in the occult and they were worshiping Nimrod? Do you understand those concepts? And, I don't think you have to, but if you ever come across those people, hopefully you would send them to us or somebody like us. And my hope is that I've answered your question. I hope I've been as respectful to you as you've been respectful to me. And for those of you listening, I hope that you will continue to understand what we do here. If this is simply not for you and there's too much quote unquote God here, there are plenty of podcasts where you can just get that content you're looking for. But I would ask that you bookmark this in your mind, because if in your pursuit of paranormal activity, you find questions that you don't have the answers to, or God forbid, you find yourself with an attachment with the spirit, an evil entity that's trying to tear you apart, I hope you would remember that we're here for you. And if, again, we can't help you, we're going to get you to somebody who can. I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight on this podcast. I know it's a little different, but I wanted to take you to some paranormal stories in the Bible while I'm answering Richard's question. If you have a story of your own, I simply ask that you write into us. We would love to consider it being on the air or even do an interview like we did last week. But more importantly, if you just need some answers and you don't want it to be on the air, we're still here for that. We're not just looking for people to put on this podcast. We're looking to be a place for people to get help. And sometimes those people make it to the air. So if you have a story, you can reach out to us at anthony@thestruggleseries.com. You can just send us an email, an audio file, or a letter. We would definitely take that and try to help you out there. You can also DM us on any of the socials, Freedom from the Struggle Podcast, or you can find us at FFTS Podcast on some of the socials. You'll have to forgive me. I don't run those, so I don't remember which ones are which. I think Twitter is FFTS, but I could be wrong. So just look for us there. You'll know by, the struggle book cover, the little black and blue um, shaded house with the little girl standing in the window. That's from the first book, The Struggle. That's the cover of that book, and that's kind of our background art for that. And then, of course, don't forget us on Patreon. If you're somebody who's interested in more content at the $2 level, you'll get access to all of the episodes one day early, as well as the entire back catalog. At the $5 level, you'll be able to access the episodes a day early, entire back catalog. You'll also have access to 2 bonus episodes a month where we discuss, pretty well known and sometimes not so well known hauntings and possession stories and break those down in depth. And then you also have access to all 3 of the books in the Struggle series: The Struggle, The Sacrifice, and the final book, The Return. And those are in their entirety. So instead of listening to them, 1 week at a time on the Struggle Series podcast, you can listen to all the books in their entirety at your leisure. So we want to just put all that in your lap. And thank you again for tuning in. I hope that this week you find many blessings and God grants you peace beyond understanding. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for listening to the Freedom from the Struggle podcast. Make sure to subscribe, tell your friends, and we will see you next time.